How are you?
Good afternoon. Thanks for still being here. I know it's been a great day and a couple of great sessions to conclude. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to say a couple things to get us kicked off. And actually, for me personally, it's been exactly 3 years since I was last here. And that was October of 2019. I was on this stage with another wonderful leader and author talking about CEO success. And I was 4 months into my role as CEO of Hill & Knowlton. And I have to say that if I'm completely honest with you, that I'm glad I didn't know on October 2019 everything we were going to face over the ensuing 3 years. So I have a lot of respect and humility when I think about everything all of us have managed through and endured and prevailed through over the last couple of years. And I'm also incredibly inspired and incredibly proud of what our discipline has accomplished and how we've really risen to the occasion. And if you don't mind, I thought I would share just a couple of thoughts because I think it sets the table nicely for the conversation we're about to have. And when I think about 3 years ago, we as communicators have always had a role in value creation. And 3 years ago when we were here talking, we were definitely charging the hill and we were creating value, we were building brands and reputation, managing issues, and really navigating the relationship between business and society. But since then, all the major fault lines have been tested globally, and you know what I'm talking about: social, economic, geopolitical, epidemiological, military fault lines, sustainability fault lines. So I think that it's been disruption at scale and speed, but equally businesses have responded beautifully. And there has been remarkable transformation that's been occurring across industries, and the research showed that during the pandemic that the equivalent of decades of progress were made in many industries, especially through the digitization of many industries, really in just a few months' time. So this has been a time that has shown us really that seismic change is always possible, that the whole idea of there being a status quo is sort of an illusion, and that there is a ton of opportunity and a ton of risks, so things can change rapidly, either to the upside or to the downside. And that's what we as communicators are perpetually navigating. And that really brings us to today, because the whole endeavor of value creation, everything that our colleagues in our industries pursue, can't occur successfully without superb communication strategy. And that means that we're in the hot seat. It means that we are making very material decisions. It means that we are really at the center of the action. And I hope that it reflects the ascendancy of our discipline. I think the quality of the program that Paul and Arun have put together reflects the ascendancy of our discipline. We see the industry growing beautifully, and it just reflects the materiality of what we do. And what we have to do is focus on integrating those learnings of the last couple of years and really applying them to build better workplaces, which might be the most important thing we do to create value. So I really hope this next session will help us all synthesize some of those learnings of the last few years. And really, there's nobody better to do that with than Johnny. And for those of you who don't know Johnny, he's been a very visible and I think courageous leader through this period of upheaval, leading the Society for Human Resources Management as its CEO. And I think that all in, you and SHRM basically impact like 115 million workers around the world. It's the largest HR trade association in the world, and he brings to that role a really rich and varied experience as a CEO, as a business leader, as a lawyer. He's been in senior leadership roles at IAC Interactive Corporation, Paramount Pictures, Blockbuster, McGuire Woods. He was president and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which many of you know advocates for the support of historically black colleges and universities. He's also served as the chair of the President's Advisory Board on HBCUs. He's a trustee of the University of Miami, and I'm happy to say he's a member of the board of directors at XPO Logistics, where he's been my colleague on the board for more than a year. So Johnny and I have had an opportunity to talk about these topics a little bit before and to work on some of them together as colleagues on that board. So hope we can bring some of those conversations to you in a way that you find interesting and valuable. So, yeah, okay, good. All right, so with that as an introduction, I thought we'd start by talking about the book that you produced in the middle of the pandemic, which was very impressive.
Nothing
that
else
you
to
actually
do, right?
I know, exactly. I don't know if you've seen it or are familiar with it. It's a good book for all of us in our profession, I think, to spend some time with. It's an easy read. It's called Reset, A Leader's Guide to Work in an Age of Upheaval. And I think your basic premise is that at a time of extraordinary upheaval, there's a reset opportunity for transformation, but there's also a roadmap for conducting that kind of transformation successfully. And what's the cliff note here about the premise of this book?
Well, I tell you, first of all, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend time with you. I'm here in DC, so this is great. I didn't have to travel here, but I would have done it for you. So, let me set it up by saying and reminding us about a really pivotal date in history. We all kind of know where we were 9/11, right? The real question is, have you thought about where you were on Friday the 13th? Friday, March 13th, 2020. Because in many ways, that's when you don't think about that date, but that's when all of a sudden, everything that we knew as normal went out the window. Well, that included me scrambling around as a CEO. We have 3 offices in India, Dubai. We're based here. We got California offices. We've got people everywhere. And I was like, there's a big push. The then president of the United States has said, listen, we're all going home. And we're like, but we didn't plan for this. Like, we don't know how people are supposed to work from home, what they're supposed to do, et cetera. So I began writing a book. I'm sitting at home with a then 9-year-old and a 29-year-old son, and I was like, they don't like me and I don't like them. So they liked me traveling, they loved me, but being at home with them was a lot, and not being able to go anywhere. If you remember, everything was shut down, right? So we spent this time, but think about what we were all told. It was 21 days, 30 days, 45 days, we're gonna get back to normal. So I thought it was really interesting and decided I was gonna write a book, and the working title was The Great Pause, because the idea was I wanted to chronicle how this thing happened so that I could tell my grandchildren and great-grandchildren about this whole thing. Well, no surprise, 90 days in, 120 days in, 180 days in, it wasn't going to be a great pause. I realized that the upheaval that we were experiencing, a lifetime, was going to be more akin to a reset. If you think about it, when you pause on a tape recorder, for those of us who are old enough to have used one, you stop it, and whenever you come back and hit it, you pick up just where you left off. That isn't what we experienced, and we now know 2.5 years later that especially wasn't what happened in the world of work. Employees literally changed during that period of time. Their relationship with work, were they going to be a worker going forward? Did they want to work in the workplace, or did they want to work from home? Like, all of these things overnight changed in a way that we wanted to chronicle in the book. The upheaval happened to us. The transformation was a decision each of us in our organizations had to make. Were we going to long for the past and say, can we go back to the good old days when people came into the office Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and do that? Did every employee have to physically work in the office? All of these questions were coming about. And along the way, we had George Floyd's senseless killing. That was a black swan event. I mean, there were just so many things happening at once that we tried to capture in the book. And I was just writing and thinking about it. And out of that, we have a research team back at SHRM, PhDs. There are 25 PhDs, IO psychologists and statisticians, and they were doing nothing. All we do all day, every day, till this day, is we speak to employees and employers and try to understand what's the sentiment. Much like you all do in your roles, this is what we do with employees globally, is to understand how did they change over that period of time, what sort of loss did we make, what sort of progress did we make, et cetera. And that's what the book does. In short, is we chronicle that, and then we talk about what are ways for us to respond to an incredibly transformed workplace. That's what the book is really all about. And luckily, the Wall Street Journal agreed. We were number 3 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. So it sold a lot of books, and all proceeds go to the Sherm Foundation. So it's all going to a charitable cause, our 501c3 subsidiary. But that is what it was really about, is what happened and how did we respond? Let me just say this. A lot of organizations didn't respond particularly well. As much as we say, and hopefully you all don't belong to those organizations, but a lot of them didn't, and they're feeling it now, led to the exacerbated Great Resignation, turnover tsunami, whatever one calls it. All of that is played out in the book.
Actually, let's go right to that topic because I know it's of interest, and I think it's come up earlier today. And so we did experience the Great Resignation. It is still in many respects occurring. A couple of questions related to that. One is, do you see through your sensing mechanism, that today's macro conditions will artificially slow the Great Resignation? And if so, what does that mean? I'm also wondering what we've learned about how to have a more compelling proposition for employees and what's important to them as we come through this period of change.
So the answer is no. And here's some bad news for any of you who don't realize this. Americans stopped having children in meaningful numbers in the year 2000. We have been on now a 21-year decline. In the year 2020, the American birth rate dropped 4%, an additional 4%, and we've been seeing the decline. And as much as we love our millennials, they have pets, not children. And so we have this little problem that we, actually like that, they're not replicating themselves. So and you just think about this, I've said this in a couple of cases, but if all of you all felt particularly frisky and went home tonight and procreated, it's not gonna solve for our workplace problems for another 20 years. Just think about that. You can have a kid now, but until we educate them, grow them up, get them ready to come into the workforce, at a minimum 20 years. And if they go to college, it's more like 22, 23 years. So we have a fundamental problem that when people say, oh my gosh, now the Great Recession, God bless you, the Great Recession is going to change all of this, and oh my gosh, we're going to get relief. A little relief, but not a lot. There's this funny number. Unemployment now is hovering around 3.5, 3.6%. The reality is, and we know this, 4% of Americans don't want to work anyway. So when you're below 4%, you're actually trying to convince people to come to work who have no desire or interest in coming to your workplace. They want to be paid. They don't necessarily want to work. And there's all sorts of articles that you're seeing everywhere about the mindset shift that occurred. I love the articles that say, we want more pay, which, by the way, we've seen wage inflation as a real issue, quantifiable challenge, and it's rightfully so in many instances. At the same time, labor participation, BLS report, Sherm reports, is down, and productivity is down. It's the first time in history, it almost doesn't make sense that you could pay people more, fewer of them want to participate, and the ones who do don't want to work as hard. That's a problem, and that's a systemic problem that is not, yes, the market will slow up a little bit over the next 2 or 3 quarters as the economic slowdown occurs, but there's nothing that should give you all any comfort that this war for talent is going to lessen.
Thanks.
Sorry. How depressing is that?
It really is. All right. So what are the levers for dealing with it? Like, what are we learning about how to deal with this?
So the first thing that we have to do, and this is, you all are experts at this, is you've got to engage in extreme listening. We've got to really start to listen to our employees. And some hear when I say listening that means you have to give them everything that they're asking for. I'm not suggesting that, but you must understand what is in the mindset, the hearts of our employees these days. And it is very different than even 28 months ago. It's just a very different relationship with work. And as soon as you understand that, the better off you are. We focus a lot on our external messaging and not enough on our internal messaging. Employees literally are your ambassador, one way or the other. They can destroy you or make you. And because of the democratized web now, online, they can go in and create a campaign. I love it, and we talk about this in the headlines. Apple employees don't want to come back to work. Yeah, 1,000 of them. The other 192,000 are just fine, especially the ones who worked in the store called an Apple store, many of whom who didn't have the luxury of working remotely. That's a classic example. The media, everyone works remotely. Well, here's a really interesting stat. Between 48 and 52% of America's workers never had the luxury of working remotely. So while we were busy saying everyone's working remotely at the height of the pandemic, most of your fellow colleagues were working in a workplace because the world didn't stop. And I'm not just talking hospitals and law enforcement, I'm talking a ton of other people, manufacturers had to continue working. And not just employees in the traditional sense, but the gig employees. You know, I loved it. I'm sitting at home and it says, well, everyone's working remotely. Let me call my Uber driver to bring me some food. That person's working. You know, the irony of this all, and it's lost. And so what has happened, to answer your question during this, is employees have a different level of respect of their employers and management. And we're working through that right now. There's a lot of hostility, a lot of us versus they. And so this process of extreme listening is really responsive, and then responding to it. So now that you've listened, what we all have to do, and I know we're going to talk about this, I hope we're going to talk about it, is culture. Being really, really, really clear about what the culture is within your organization. We refer to it as cultural clarity. And my friends, I'm not talking about foosball machines and popcorn machines and free lunch. Those are not the indicators of good culture anymore. It very much is deeper than that, and it's resting in, and all of your solutions are in listening.
So many directions to go with that. So I want to test with you a theory that I've developed. And you and I have both been functional leaders in big corporations, but we're also now both CEOs of global organizations. And so as I've worked myself through the pandemic, leading a talent-driven business, dealing with the Great Resignation and thinking about our proposition for employees, the framework that I've created in my mind is for us to be effective as an employer in today's world, that we need to connect our employees to purpose, to our strategy, so that they can see the firm's purpose and strategy, but see themselves in that purpose and strategy. That also, that we have to have a strong proposition around learning and development, and that we have to be a learning organization, and people have to feel like when they're a part of our organization that they can achieve more because of that proposition. And then there has to be an environment of wellness, kind of like a wellness orientation, wellness in all of its dimensions, you know, supported by inclusion, supported by competitive compensation. But that's the framework, and on any given day, we are, you know, degrees of imperfect in all of those domains. Like, it's not an easy proposition, but if I continue to pursue that as a framework, will I be successful or not?
Well, so a lot in there, and I'm going to quickly try to unpack it. First of all, I started with this concept of cultural clarity. One of the struggles that many business leaders, all of you in the room, is we've decided this notion that there are good cultures and bad cultures. Let me immediately disabuse you of that idea. Save for illegal, immoral, unethical cultures, there's no such thing as a bad culture. It is a bad culture when you are not clear about what your culture is, and therefore you recruit someone from organization A to come to your organization, and you tell them this is our employer brand, and this is who we are, this is our aspirational culture, and they get there and like, this is not it. You fooled me. Now they're pissed, and that's when the Glassdoor things go down, and that's when the unions come in, and that's because we've not been honest with people. What I have found in my role and in the 95% of the companies that are Fortune 500 companies that are SHRM members is that we spend a lot of time broadcasting our aspirational culture as opposed to our real culture. I spent some time 2 weeks ago with the CHRO of, what's the big finance, Goldman Sachs in New York. And you know, depending upon what articles you read, like, oh my gosh, that's the worst place in the world to work. But when you talk to their employees, they have incredibly high levels of satisfaction because they are so clear on the way in. Yes, you're going to work 60 hours a week as a given, but you're also going to make 150% of market. So you just decide if this is what you want. If you came here for work-life balance, probably not going to get it, but they're honest about it. What we as organizations do too often is we tell people what we think they want to hear. And that is where the problem starts. Imagine dating someone, heading toward marriage, and the day after I do, your real self shows up. They're pissed, rightly so. And that's what we've done in our workplaces. So when I talk about this cultural clarity, one of the things that we advise all of our organizations is sit down with your management team and be very honest and introspective about what does it mean to work here? And then like literally put that to paper, old school, or newspapers in your notes, and then describe the behaviors that will be rewarded or not so rewarded if people don't do that, and then bring that into your talent acquisition process. There's no point in recruiting people into an organization and not being honest with them about how the organization works. I'll give you Coinbase. This is a big, I think you and I talked about this. Maybe a year or so ago, they were having a lot of problems in the workplace with political discussions and people, and we know there's a lot of polarization. News alert, it's getting worse as we head into midterms in the workforce, in the workplace. So he decided that we're going to ban all such conversations. It's distracting, I don't want it, it has my people not doing their work and they're fighting with each other. And of course, he got trashed in the media. It was like, this is the worst thing in the world, this is a horrible, bad culture. And the media pointed to 30% or so of the employees quit. What they didn't tell you is that he was hit with an avalanche of people who actually wanted to work in that environment, who did not want to come to work and debate with you over left, right, black, white, male, female. They just didn't want to do it. And so while we were busy saying that's a bad culture, a bad example of culture, in fact, it was perfect for some people. And that's where this all gets lost, is we are not really listening and then being clear about who we are. I did want to touch on one other part of that. So do that and so when you announce whatever or articulate your culture, be honest about it, is the takeaway. Let's talk about money just real quickly. We do have a wage inflation problem. It is spiraling. And if none of you have seen, the feds are trying to do something about it. And they've said they're not going to stop until we give in. Meanwhile, stubbornly, there's a persistence in wage inflation. We've gone up so far right now, it's just out of control. And now I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing, because people need a living wage, and I get it, et cetera. But we have a problem now, which is an outcome of the slowing economy. And that is, your consumer won't take the additional cost anymore. So employees want more money. The consumer is saying, I'm either going to take less of what you produce or none of what you produce, but I'm not going to pay $20 for a Happy Meal. Just not going to do it. So at the same time that employees, and here's what happened, and people don't really realize this. Remember pre-pandemic, you want to talk about an upheaval and a transformation. Pre-pandemic, there was a national conversation around a $15 an hour minimum wage. Remember that? Guess what happened right after that? The pandemic. We introduced $600 a week from the federal government, no matter where you lived in the country, plus $400 a week on average from the state government and unemployment. By the way, we offered unemployment benefits to people who were never employed, something we've never done in history. So that's $1,000 a week. Do the math, $25 an hour. So people rush past this. So get this, I'm making $25 an hour sitting at home, and you think I'm going to come back and work for your $15 an hour? Not even. I'm just not interested in it. And so then that pushed it up. So we have compression. So I was in North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota. Buffalo Wild Wings was advertising for frontline employees $25 an hour. I want to know what those damn chicken wings did, but I still wanted, like, what do you do for $25 an hour in a Buffalo Wild Wings? But what does that mean for the manager of those employees, the director of the region, the vice president? It pushes it up. Meanwhile, the employees are saying, really? The cost of a chicken wing just jumped 40%? My point is, there's a real tension now that we have in the market, and the wage inflation issue is our number one issue that we're confronting, and that's keeping CEOs up at night. Now, many of you say, listen, I'm not in that business. I'm in a knowledge-based professional services job. Many of your clients are. And so they are beginning to feel the pressure. And I don't know what that's, we're kind of guessing. How are employees going to respond to us saying no more? Because we can't afford it. The consumer won't do it, and you want more. And thus we have conflict. That's a communication game, and we've got to explain it, that this wage inflation issue is real.
Yeah, I think as communicators, we have some sort of extraordinary opportunities and challenges ahead in terms of how business models and strategies are going to evolve and change, and it will be more disruption.
Well, and then finally, to layer on top of all of that, we have 5 generations in the workplace at one time, for the first time in history, 5 generations. And here's something really striking about it. 40 to 43% of them have never been through an economic downturn as adults. So when you talk about wellness, mental health, we know is a big issue in the workplace right now. And what we're trying to do is bring parity to mental health and physical health. And you say, oh, of course we do. No, you don't. If you go into the hospital and you get sick, our health insurance benefits will take care of you forever. Call EAP. Most of our plans give you 3 free calls, maybe 5. After that, you got to figure it out on your own. So there is no parity from an employee benefits perspective between mental and health benefits. We're working on that. That's a big driver right now. But we know that the number one driver, there are a lot of drivers, but the number one driver right now for employees in terms of stress is financial stress. And it's about to get pretty damn ugly for people who've never, do the math, 2008 was the last economic crisis, that was 14 years ago. So if you got out of college at 23, 24, you're 38 years old. Anyone under 40 has largely never lived through an economic crisis. This is eye-awakening, and it's stressing them in real ways that's showing up in the workplace. Did you see the article the other day about Experian? Right. 25 of their employees they fired because they learned that many of them had 3 full-time jobs at one time. So they worked for Experian. Now, a whole big question about privacy. Like, how in the hell did they figure that out? But that's a whole different story. But the fact of the matter is they had full-time employees who had 2 other full-time jobs. This is the reality coming out of the pandemic. And some of that's been made possible because of remote work. Because it's kind of hard to have 3 jobs when you got to be in the office in the walls with someone else. So there are these consequences that are flowing from all of this that, sorry to drop on your laps this day. It's like, God, did I want anything this damn heavy? But this is the reality.
Well, you're making important points about how leaders have to lead differently, and you're talking about what is keeping the CEO up at night, and there are now, a menu of issues and challenges that.
But not just a CEO.
Yeah.
Every one of you in the room, as a people manager, this is your issue. People don't quit companies, and rarely do they quit CEOs. They quit their people manager. So that's perhaps our biggest problem, and that's why this issue has to cascade down into the organization. This extreme listening, this clarity around culture, and a focus on whole well-being, not just physical well-being.
Yeah. In terms of being intentional about culture, how do we maintain that and live a culture in a highly distributed workforce, hybrid workforce, sometimes largely remote workforce today? And then equally, before we run out of time, I do want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
Are we really breaking through? Have we reached critical mass? Are we going to stop being sort of crisis-driven, and really have durable strategies and create real change? And what does it mean today to lead inclusively?
Right. So let me take the first part. I don't know. We just don't know. The work from home thing is a grand experiment. Anyone who tells you that we've figured this out is wrong. For the first year of it, it was work from home when everyone was working from home, and you didn't have options. You couldn't go to movie theaters, you couldn't go to bars, you were stuck in home. So we saw productivity, and that's the funny thing, data will tell you everything. We have information now, BLS data, longitudinal data, that would show you that yes, productivity went down. It's been steadily decreasing because as people have options outside of the home that didn't exist in the earliest days of the pandemic, we're seeing productivity falls. So we got to figure that out. But I will tell you that will stick with us for a while is remote work's not going anywhere. But it's less remote work and it's more flexibility. It's a little bit of a red herring. What people are saying, we know young people and old people, many of them still want to come to the office. They just don't want to come every day, and they want to have the flexibility to integrate work and their personal lives. And so that's here to stay. And organizations who fight that are going to lose the battle because the genie's out of the jar, right? This idea of you're going to come back and you're going to work the way we used to, they're not having it. And I just told you the numbers say the employees have to leverage. That's number one. So what do managers have to do is more effectively figure out how to bring them in so that you don't create two different cultures. And that's what we're seeing right now. There's an in-office culture, the people who come to the office and the people who don't. And we know over time, I'm very concerned from a DE&I perspective, when I read articles, African-American women, for example, don't want to come back into the workplace because they enjoyed not being subjected to the microaggressions. Check. But has anyone had the conversation about the old adage of out of sight, out of mind, and what the long-term implications will be on their careers? Have we had those conversations? We know that's real. And so at the same time, we've got to figure out how to, as best we can, mitigate the impact, but acknowledge that decisions to work fully remotely when the rest of your colleagues are in the office will put you at a disadvantage over time. It's about being honest with people and doing what we can, again, to mitigate it, not accepting that as a truth, but the problem is, it is a truth. As an African-American executive coming up in corporate America, 20 years of it, one of my chief complaints and concerns was, and my colleagues, was we didn't have visibility. We couldn't build a network. We couldn't build relationships. Well, news alert, that doesn't happen if you're in your living room and that person's at work, or you're in your living room and they're in their living room. So we've got to figure it out. It's a big issue. So let me end on your point around diversity, equity, inclusion. So I actually call it IEND instead of DE&I for a couple of reasons. Fortunately, our country is far more diverse. When you think about the progress, we have made an amazing level of progress over the 20 years in diversity. America's public school systems are majority minority. So guess what? Your workforce of the future will be more diverse unless you are intentionally not doing it, right? So that's coming. So it's not that we don't think diversity matters. Inclusion is the holy grail. We believe for 30 years that if we ran diversity programs and we created more diverse workforces, that our problems would be solved. And then we realized that managing a diverse workforce is far more difficult than any of us imagined. The more complicated it gets, people bringing different experiences, expectations, et cetera, to the workplace, means you got a problem. And so inclusion is the driver right now. In fact, we renamed our biggest conference, which just sold out in San Diego, it's occurring right now, the Inclusion Conference and not the Diversity Conference, because diversity is largely coming. There's still spots. But what we're learning from it, two quick things. One is you can't program your way out of diversity. That's one of the challenges. Over the last 30 years, we've sent all of the signals of diversity, a Women's Month, the Black People Month, the Latino Month. We just went through the list and we have a day for this group and a day for that group, and we thought that we could have activities that conveyed the message that we're a diverse organization. What employees are telling us is they want you to culturally embed inclusion, equity, and diversity into the organization, that it is a cultural issue. All the programs in the world, and frankly, all of the diversity in the world, can still lead to an environment that's not inclusive. And we keep forgetting that you can get diversity and not have inclusion. And that's where you have the cultural problem and the legal problem and the PR problem and every other problem. So we are now really emphasizing a near maniacal focus on inclusion and how do we make sure that people feel like they belong, that they are included, that they're seen, get that, and heard. Try to do those, I need to stop that. And that's the way you achieve this. This seems to be the challenge of the day, and we have to shift our mindset from that of diversity programs. We go to this dinner, we go to this activity, we support this Black college, et cetera. We do all of that, yet still we have a problem. The last point on diversity is it's not just civil rights diversity. My friends, we have overly simplified that. And what do I mean by that? Race, gender, national origin, age, all of that good stuff. Very, very important and legally compliant. But we've ignored the number one issue that we are now finding in the workplaces that results in workplace toxicity: political affiliation discrimination. On one hand, people say they're committed to diversity, but what they really mean is I'm committed to diversity as long as I agree with you. And so we are now finding, given the polarization of America in the workplace, there are the people who are on this side and the people on this side, and they won't work together. They will actually legally refuse to hire someone who is different than they are, which is the freaking opposite of diversity.
This is a huge risk.
Yeah, and so we've got to address this. It's complicated, and I got a whole talk on this, but let me just tell you, this is our number one issue. Be careful what you pray for. We now have a diverse workforce, and none of them like each other. And that is not going to solve for our better workplace at all. We have more, I use this line that America is as diverse as it's ever been, and at once as divided as it's ever been. So this notion that diversity was going to solve for problems didn't quite work. And we've got to sort this because it is playing out in America's, and actually globally, our workplaces everywhere. People won't speak to each other now. Fascinating stat if you hadn't seen it. 48%, I might have my number a little off, nearly half, 48% of college sophomores have said they will not room with someone who is of a different political affiliation. Like 48%. I don't know about y'all, but hell, we didn't even think about that. I was like, whatever. But that's where we are right now. So the divide is starting very early. And then when they show up in the workplace, the divide continues. I heard my colleagues say it's hard to separate politics from these policy issues. And in fact, that's true. And the racial divide, the gender divide, everything is showing up in the workplace, and it's creating real problems on culture. I wish I have an answer for you, that's another talk, but we do have solutions specifically to addressing this, but it starts with you've got to start culturally embedding inclusion, diversity, and equity, not just messaging programs and checking the box.
I think it's also tone at the top, though, too, right?
Yes.
And that leaders really have to, at every level, have to really set a tone for inclusion. And I think as communicators, because we're often communicating on really difficult issues, and we're responding to social issues, we're responding to today's politics, and we can help set that tone to say that this is an inclusive environment, that different points of view are welcome and are important, and that we're going to have civil discourse in the workplace.
With guardrails.
Yeah.
I tell folks, we can disagree. We can agree and disagree, but you'll do it civilly with respect. Like, this is the way it works. And I shared with you in one of our board meetings an anecdote. A woman came into my office and she said, I'm really, really, really angry because I have colleagues who are going to go to, it was actually Charlottesville, and I remember the incident at Charlottesville. And I said, well, they have a right to go to Charlottesville. They shouldn't engage in criminal behavior, et cetera, but you can go wherever you want to go. And she said, well, why do that? I said, because you asked me, could you go to the BLM march? People can go wherever the hell they want to go. Like, stop it. They can't engage in behavior. They can't compromise our brand. We're not going to have that. But just going, you can't have it both ways. That's the problem with people wanting diversity as long as they agree with it. We have got to get back, stop virtue signaling. And we've got to, if you say you embrace diversity, that means by definition, you've got to embrace different. And it's much further away than the word tolerance. Remember back in the day when we talked about tolerance? Who in the hell wants someone to tolerate someone? That's a bad word. I don't even get that. We've got to truly embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion if we're going to achieve this, because the workplace is more diverse than ever, and it's becoming more so.
I think businesses are trying to be a part of the solution, and I'd love to talk to you another time about the solution you're hinting at, because we
Yes.
actually haven't talked about that. But there's a friend of mine who's probably a friend of others here in the room, a communications leader by the name of Bob Feldman.
Hi, Bob.
And Bob's created, he's not here, but Bob's created something called the Dialogue Project, which now sits at Duke University at their business
Yes,
school.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, and it's something to keep an eye on, because more and more companies are responding and saying, this is a problem, this is a business risk, and we have to actively solve for it and become a more inclusive workplace in terms of people's ability to have civil discourse and share political ideas.
Shout out real quick to another professor, Oxford professor, Dr. Irshad Manji. If you don't get her work, she has a whole platform called Moral Courage, but it's called Diversity Without Division. Really interesting concept, and she has a process by which, a framework by which you actually, and she's working with major organizations, including SHRM, to figure out how do we balance all of these diverse folks without division.
Yeah. All right, so in the time we have remaining, which is roughly 2.5 minutes, I'm going to
Okay.
do it like a quasi-lightning round with you,
Okay.
okay? So what's the most profound thing you personally have learned as you've led the HR community through the last few years?
Gosh, most profound.
Or pick one.
Oh, right.
There may be a few.
Right, I hate superlatives. I love that question. So lightning round, it would be that people, I just said it, people actually don't really embrace diversity. They talk about it, they signal it, they don't embrace it. And later on, I'll tell you, there's a reason why, because in some ways, anything foreign to us is initially rejected. Just use example. If you had your lung go bad and so you try to get a transplant, your body is going to naturally reject that, even though that thing is there to help them. We just reject different. And so that's been my biggest surprise is all of the people who say, oh, yes, yes, I love diversity, I embrace diversity. The second you tell them something with which they don't agree or doesn't sit well with them, they reject it.
That's a worthwhile grand challenge for HR leaders and communications leaders, right?
Yeah.
We can kind of lock arms on that. Okay. So do you think, is that the most urgent change then? So to create better workplaces for a better world, that's your priority?
Yes, because
Okay.
it's culture. At its core, we are not going to be successful if 20% of your population feels on any basis, be it gender, be it political affiliation, be it weight, be it whatever, if they feel like they don't belong, one, they're not giving you their best, and it is absolutely the opposite of healthy culture.
Final question. Advice for us. Global community of communications leaders across industries, across geographies, across ethnicities, political ideas and beliefs, diverse group.
Yeah. Go back to your organizations and get cultural clarity. I cannot tell you, that will be game-changing for all of you because you will then recruit people, not who are the same, because people who are committed to a cultural ethos don't all look the same, come from the same places, but the idea is clarity around who and what you are and how things get done. Do that and you're going to save a ton of problems. You're going to exclude a lot of candidates in the recruitment process, by the way, but that's a good thing. There's nothing worse than bringing people in, as I told you, and then you trick them and say, well, this is actually who we are. That's problematic. So that's what I would do is get cultural clarity. It is worth the exercise.
And I have an idea that you've given me through this session 10 seconds. I think we should unpack the big themes from this conversation and figure out the related communications agenda and the innovation that's needed from a communication standpoint to start to solve these problems.
Yes.
And that could be really interesting to do together, maybe.
We can't do it without you.
Yeah,
We
all
can
right.
come up with all the great policies and approaches and strategies, but if it's not communicated well, and that's what we've heard consistently from employees, communicate, we're going to fail.
Yeah. All right. So if you're interested, let me know. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
All. Thank you. Thank you.